Welcome back to the Celtic Way. My name's Josh McCafferty, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Dan, or as you might know him on X and Twitter, HLTCO. Dan's going to be talking to us today a bit about Jeffrey Schlupp, Celtic's deadline day signing from Crystal Palace. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, yourself.
Yeah, all good, mate. Thank you very much. So today, Celtic, we're going to be talking about Jeffrey Schlupp, obviously joined in deadline day alone until the end of the season. First of all, Dan, just tell us a bit about Jeffrey's background. Obviously, a good couple of years at Crystal Palace. Not as much of a regular in the team this season, hence his mid-season departure. What can you tell us a bit about him, just as a background?
Well, I think, if you go back to when he first joined the club, I think it was under Sam Allardyce a fair few years ago now. And he came in, I think it was 12 or 13 million pounds from Leicester. I remember at the time, there were plenty of Leicester fans who said to us, he's not the most technically gifted. He's not necessarily someone who's going to take you up the league. But he was such a dependable player for us across a number of years. Almost, I would sort of say, a bit of a Swiss Army knife in the first few seasons, because he can be sort of relied upon to play as a 6 or an 8 or on the left wing. You could even put him up front. I think, back in the day when he was obviously playing youth football, and I think, when you're sort of 12, 13 years old, the sort of cream rises to the top to a certain extent, and he was able to score a fair few goals. But yeah, he is someone who, admittedly, in the last 2 or 3 years, hasn't had much in the way of game time at Crystal Palace. But whenever he has been called upon, I think you sort of look at his positional versatility and you realise that there is a player there that can do a job for a manager. And I think in many senses, that sums him up. He's someone that managers would like to have around the group because he can sort of be slotted in numerous different places. And, I would expect that, having spoken to Celtic fans, I think that the primary aim is to play him on the left-hand side of the team. But if you did have to chuck him in as a centre mid, whether that be as an 8 or a 6, he could do a job for you there as well. So, yeah, it's difficult to know how regularly he will play for you, but I wouldn't have any sort of worries about him once he does get up to speed fitness-wise with what Brendan Rodgers wants from him, to be able to sort of, piece together 15 or 20 appearances off the bench or in sporadic starts, to be honest.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a very strong squad player. I think majority of Celtic fans agree with me in saying that the majority of appearances probably will come at left back. Obviously, Celtic have Greg Taylor there. Alex Valle, the previous backup, left mid-season, so Schlupp will predominantly play left back. But you mentioned a multitude of positions there, central midfield, left wing, even striker. What would you say his best position is, though, having watched him at Crystal Palace for a number of years?
I think it has somewhat shifted in recent times, whether that's because of a more high-energy, high-press style that we try to implement under Oliver Glasner compared to Roy Hodgson, or whether it's just the passing of time. I think, from my own personal perspective, and obviously every Crystal Palace fan will have their different view on him because of his positional versatility, but as someone who's sort of a combative number 8 is how I view Jeffrey Schlupp as in his best role. He scored a fantastic goal away at Fulham at the back end of last season. I was in the away end that day and he just smashed it out of absolutely nowhere. We were losing the game 1-0 at the time. It salvaged a point for us. And it brought him back into everyone's thought process, really, because he had been out of the team, on the bench sporadically and not getting many minutes. But it does show that particular goal in isolation that he does have the quality. And maybe at Celtic, if he does get a run of 5 or 10 starts, he can really build up a head of steam again. Because, and I appreciate it's one of those conversations that you could have about the strength of the Scottish top tier compared to the Premier League. There's no disgrace in not being able to get into our midfield when you've got Jefferson Lerma, when you've got Adam Wharton, when you've got Will Hughes. If you can't get regular minutes there from the start, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do a job elsewhere. And I think the fact that he can be slotted in elsewhere on the 11, it should serve him very well for you across the rest of this campaign.
Were you a bit surprised about a January departure to Celtic, or was it not something particularly shocked at?
I think, if you look at his situation contract-wise with us, I'm pretty sure he's up for a new deal or the end of his current one and potentially moving on in the summer. Obviously, the wages are a factor as well. It's not as though we're up against it FFP-wise, but if you've got a player that isn't going to get regular minutes, what is he, 30 now? He probably wants to go and play regular football. He's got a Champions League knockout game to look forward to, which is quite a departure from what he would have been expecting at Crystal Palace. So that's a boost for him on a personal level. And I think given the fact that he's been at Leicester, he spent a lot of years at Crystal Palace, he's probably looking at this as an opportunity to go and play north of the border and have a really positive time. You know, you look at what Joe Hart was able to do moving to Celtic, and I think he really bought into it. Jack Butland is another player, albeit a goalkeeper, who moved to Rangers from Crystal Palace and, you know, really asserted himself. So I think probably, you know, Jeff Schlupp's looked at that as a model and thought, well, I'll have a bit of that. And, you know, it's quite interesting. He's going to go up against Michael Elise in the Champions League now, which is a bit of a mad turn of events. I'm sure they'll have a few words. But, yeah, I wish him well. And I've always liked Jeff. He's a very solid member of the group, never really kicked up a fuss and always given his all whenever he's put the shirt on. So, you know, I think every Crystal Palace fan really wished him well, to be honest.
One thing I wanted to touch on, you touched on it there, was the contractual situation at Crystal Palace. Obviously, his deal there expires in the summer. Celtic have only brought him in on a 6 months loan until the end of the season. There's obviously no option to buy in that. Do you see him having a long-term future, signing a new deal at Palace, or could you see him perhaps moving to Celtic permanently in the summer?
I think obviously you never say never. You know, it depends on how you look at it squad depth-wise and what Oliver Glasner wants. But I think he, as a manager, is someone who is quite forthright with the board about his own preferences. You know, you look at a different player in Jordan Ayew, someone that was a key player for Crystal Palace for a number of years. It was very quickly evident that Oliver Glasner and Jordan Ayew, for a multitude of reasons, weren't going to mesh particularly well. And I think you could probably say the same for Jeff. I don't think there's any personal issue there. It's just a tactical ideology. And with his contract being up, with Celtic being such a sizable club and the prestige that comes with regular title races and Champions League football, it could well be that the contract ends with us. He's free to sign a deal and you end up putting him on a 2 or 3 year contract. I think he would be open to it rather than sticking around in the Premier League and making up minutes off the bench, particularly if he does get regular starts for you. And if you do change the makeup of your squad across a summer, and he's left with a situation where that left-back role isn't necessarily one that is open to him, that positional versatility should mean that Brendan Rodgers can use him in different places. So I wouldn't be too surprised at all.
And then another thing I wanted to ask about, obviously you spoke about it earlier, was the Michael Elise link-up in the Bayern Munich clash. I think a lot of Crystal Palace fans will be taking a keen interest on that game. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, we love Michael. You know, it's one of those things where for a club of our size, we have to be appreciative of the fact that he's just a world level talent. You know, we were telling people this from sort of 6 months in from him being at Crystal Palace. And even though, you know, we sold him for £50 million, I think that still looks like a drop in the ocean now, but it was the nature of the release clause. He's one of those players that even though he was only with us for 3 or so years, you just had to sort of lap up every single second of him in a Crystal Palace shirt. And I find myself now checking Bayern Munich's games and seeing how he's getting on. Obviously, he's absolutely smashing it over there. And it will be interesting to see whether or not there is, you know, a crunching tackle between Michael on the right-hand side of Bayern's attack and Jeff Schlupp potentially playing at left-back. He might end up putting him out of the game. Who knows? Hopefully not, but, you know, we'll have to wait and see.
Another point about Jeffrey Schlupp is a lot of people may actually don't know is he's an English Premier League winner with Leicester. Obviously, you'll be more tuned into English football than a lot of the people watching this, myself included. What was he like during that title-winning campaign, if you can remember anything from it?
Well, I don't think he played, you know, a starring role, but I think if you look at that Leicester squad in general, you know, there were a lot of players there similar really to the current guys of Nottingham Forest with the squad that Nuno Espirito Santo's built at the City Ground. Obviously, they have standout individuals. In the Leicester team, you had, you know, key role players. But Jeff Schlupp, I think, similar to what we've been talking about in this first few minutes, you know, he was just somebody that came in, made his appearances, made no real tangible errors and just kept the train on the tracks, as it were. And I think that largely is what you will get from Jeff. He's not someone that will drop clangers left, right and centre. He may not move the needle in terms of doing something that gets bums off seats or raising eyebrows, but he is someone from a manager's point of view who will be viewed as dependable. And there was, I mean, I'm not sure if you were going to ask me this, but I'll tell you anyway. There is one particular memory that I and many Crystal Palace fans have of Jeffrey Schlupp. It was a game against Bournemouth. I think it was a Tuesday night. And it was one of the rare times, I think it was the first time ever actually, that we'd been on Amazon Prime when they had the coverage midweek with all of the games at once. We went down to 10 men at Selhurst after about 15 or 20 minutes. We were 0-0. It got to 70 minutes and he burst through the lines, beat 2 or 3 men, made his way into the box and smashed one into the bottom corner. And we ended up winning that game 1-0. And I think that if you were to ask any Palace fan what their abiding memory of Jeffrey Schlupp is, I think that ultimately would be number one in many people's minds, and hopefully he can do the same for you.
Yeah, he's certainly prone to scoring a good few goals. Obviously, the one I think it was against Fulham that he spoke about earlier is propped up on Twitter a good few times among Celtic fans. It was a peach of a goal. International scene, Ghana international. I believe Jeff is born in Germany though. But Ghana international, do you think he'll have the AFCON at the end of this year in his mind, potentially, when he's looking at his long-term future?
Possibly. It's not something that has really cropped up too much throughout the last couple of years, but obviously, the prestige of playing for a Champions League side, if you do manage to get through against Bayern Munich, that's only going to aid his cause. And if he does, play a starring role for you in what you would expect to be a title-winning season, then who knows? Maybe the Ghana international camp will think, he's someone that we want to have as part of the AFCON squad. I mean, from a Palace perspective, you obviously have to look after number one in terms of our domestic form, and that potentially has curtailed any chances that he would have had to make regular appearances for Ghana. But it's certainly something that I wouldn't expect to be boxed off to him at all. He's not of an age where international football is behind him. I think it's just a case of getting regular minutes under his belt and feeling as though he's in a groove, and that could well happen with yourselves.
Yeah, finally, before we finish off, one player I wanted to ask about was Odsonne Edouard. Obviously moved to Palace from Celtic a couple of years ago. Was on loan at Leicester beginning of this campaign. How's he getting on down south?
It's a very, very strange situation. That so obviously when he first arrived from yourselves, there was a great deal of fanfare. We really bought into. You remember the song that you had? Everyone knows it, the Stone Roses one. We really thought this is our 15 goal a season striker. He's going to be the one to take us on and push us into the top half. And he obviously scored with his first touch against Tottenham. Scored again a few minutes later. We were all on cloud nine with it. And then for a number of reasons, really, his form didn't quite carry on in that same vein. When Oliver Glasner came in, there was hope that he would recapture the sort of goal-scoring form that he enjoyed at Celtic, but it didn't really work out for him. He ended up going on loan to Leicester. I'm pretty sure, similar to what I was just saying about Jordan Ayew, that there was a tactical sort of butting of heads between him and Oliver Glasner. He obviously went to Leicester, hasn't really enjoyed many minutes at all, to the point where they've actually, I think, wanted to send him back. We're saying we don't even want him. I don't really know where Odsonne Edouard stands in this. We've obviously got Eddie Nketiah as the backup to Jean-Philippe Mateta at the moment, and we only play with one striker, so there's no direct need for us to have 3 out-and-out front men. But whether or not he's going to just be left in limbo for the rest of this season, no one's quite sure. Obviously, the wages are a factor for a club like yourselves if you were going to have to, take those over. But I think if you were to ask him, he'd probably be very, very open to making the move back to Celtic Park, given the enjoyable time he had in your colours for 3 or 4 years. Yeah,
definitely. There was quite a few links to Odsonne Edouard last summer, I believe, and Kieran Tierney coming back to Celtic in the summer. Jota already came back this window. So, to be honest, as a Celtic-minded person at the minute, it wouldn't be that much of a shock to see Odsonne make the move back. Yeah. But thank you very much, Dan, for taking the time to be very cool. Really appreciate it.
Happy to do it whenever you need me.
No worries. Thank you. And guys, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Comment down below your thoughts on Jeffrey Schlupp and the like in the comments. Thanks again for watching.